Well, joining me to discuss the wider issues is international affairs analyst Marco Vicenzino. Marco, thanks very much indeed for joining us. What sort of assessment have you made of these talks in Vienna?
The October 30th talks in Vienna in trying to forge a diplomatic solution to the conflict in Syria, I would say it was a thawing of the ice, not the breaking of the ice. One could also say we agree to disagree. It was important because at least it was all past talks have failed. What I think makes this one different is the fact that you had all the major powers at the table. Iran was at the table for the first time. That makes a major difference. That in of itself, to have getting everyone under one roof in the same room, I think that was a major achievement in and of itself. And also is the fact is that it changes the diplomatic dynamic. Now, getting everyone on the same page is something else. There was clear disagreement at the table. No one expected anyone to agree yesterday. But in 2 weeks, they've agreed to meet again and to begin a diplomatic process. And hopefully at some stage it will involve some members of the opposition together with the Assad government. At the talks tomorrow, it's important to remember, neither the Assad regime nor anyone from the opposition were present at the table.
Yes,
it was just the international players.
Point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, in your assessment, is there any link between the timing of the deployment of U.S. special forces and the talks in Vienna?
I think it was once the Russians had begun the air campaign in late September, that's made a major difference. And it's that air campaign, in my opinion at least, and it was a diplomatic surge marked by an air campaign, which you call a military intervention of Syria, that made yesterday's talks more possible. The Russians were looking to accelerate the whole process. It's just that they want to do military intervention, but also to make sure the diplomatic process moves forward. Now, the timing, I would say, is so the Americans, listen, American policy in Syria, let's be straightforward, has been very reactive since the very beginning. And the fact is that once the Russians intervened in Syria, the Americans saw that it's time to bring up their game.
So essentially, would that strengthen the hand of the U.S. and its allies at the talks, the deployment of these forces?
That's one way of looking at it. I think, obviously, is to say that you're not going to only be the only ones that are going to be intervening. The Americans, yes, they've been bombing ISIS sites for a while now in Syria, but the idea is that Russians also have some troops on the ground. Now, what exactly they do and how they're involved, one can debate that, but the Americans want to clearly make it clear to the Russians and to everyone else, and once again, to strengthen their hand at the negotiating table, is that we're having special forces placed in the north together with Kurdish fighters who directly, and their priority is to fight ISIS.
So fewer than 50 special forces going to Syria. Some are calling it tinkering around the edges, a band-aid on a gaping wound. What exactly will these 50 special forces aim to achieve?
Training, advising, and assisting. And what that means is that basically, if at times they have to go on missions with some of these forces, let's be straightforward. It's YPG or the Kurdish fighters. Now, there's this thing that the Americans their backing is what's called Democratic Forces of Syria. It's a combination of YPG together with some Arab militias, bringing them together and trying to make them fight effectively on the ground, with the focus being ISIS, not the Assad government. The Americans, I would say, is that for a long time they've been, as I mentioned, too reactive. They're trying to accelerate this process, and whereby the president, in my opinion, is playing a game of rhetorical gymnastics. What I mean by that is the fact that he's saying we're sending these 50 special operations forces, they're training, advising, and assisting, but at the same time he has to make it clear that they may be going on combat operations, maybe not taking the initiative, but also advising on combat operations. One American soldier was killed in northern Iraq recently, and the president was saying that the Americans weren't involved, they were just advising, and it creates a conflict. It emits conflicting signals, not only to the American public, but to many of our allies.
Marco, always appreciate your analysis there. Marco Vicenzino, the international affairs analyst.